Wealth can wane. Kinfolk of influence shall die. Someday you too might die. But I know one thing that'll never die. And that's the honor of somebody who's earned his draft at Sumble. Come closer and let an old skald tell the story of one such person. This is Heroes of Our Folk.
Hail and welcome. In December, I like to mark Egil Skallagrimson's Remembrance, and I'm going to read from the Egil Saga. Chapter 40. Skallagrim took a great delight in trials of strength and games, and he liked talking about them. Ball games were common in those days, and there were plenty of strong men in the district at the time. None of them could match Skallagrim in strength, even though he's fairly advanced in age by then. Thord, Granny's son, from Grandstader, was a promising young man, and was very fond of Egil Skallagrimson. Egil was a keen wrestler. He was impetuous and quick-tempered, and everyone was aware that they had to teach their sons to give in to him. A ball game was arranged early in winter on the plains by the river Fitta, and crowds of people came to it from all over the district. Many of Skallagrim's men attended, and Thord Granison was their leader. Egil asked Thord if he could go to the game with him, and he was in his 7th year then. Thord let him, and seated Egil behind him when he rode there. When they reached the games meeting, the players were divided into teams. A lot of small boys were there as well, and they formed teams to play their own games. Egil was paired against a boy called Grim, the son of Heg, from Hegstader. Grim was 10 or 11 years old and strong for his age. When they started playing the game, Egil proved to be the weaker than Grim, who showed off his strength as much as he could. Egil lost his temper, wielded the bat, and struck Grim, who seized him and dashed him to the ground roughly, warning him that he would suffer for it if he did not learn how to behave. When Egil got back to his feet, he left the game, and the boys jeered at him. Egil went to see Thord Granison and told him what had happened. Thord said, "I'll go with you, and we'll take our revenge." Thord handed Egil an axe he had been holding, a common type of weapon in those days. They walked over to where the boys were playing their game. Grim had caught the ball and was running with the other boys, chasing him. Egil ran up to Grim and drove the axe into his head, right through to the brain. Then Egil and Thord walked away to their people. The people from Maiar seized their weapons, and so did the others. Olaf Hjatti rushed to join the people from Borg with his men. Theirs was a much larger group, and at that the two sides parted. As a result, a quarrel developed between Olaf and Heg. They fought at battle at Laxvik by the river Grimsa, where 7 men were killed. Heg received a fatal blow, and his brother Kvig died in the battle. When Egil returned home, Skallagrim seemed indifferent to what had happened. But Bera said he had the makings of a true Viking when he was old enough to be put in command of warships. Then Egil spoke this: "My mother said it would be bought, a boat with fine oars. Set off with Vikings, stand up on the prow, command the precious craft, then enter port, kill a man and another." When Egil was 12, he was so big that few grown men were big and strong enough that he could not beat them at games. In the year that he was 12, he spent a lot of the time taking part in games. Thord Granison was in his 20th year then, and strong too. That winter, Egil and Thord often took sides together in games against Skallagrim. Once during the winter, there was a ball game at Borg in Sandvik, to the south. Egil and Thord played against Skallagrim, who grew tired, and they came off better. But that evening, after sunset, Egil and Thord began losing. Skallagrim was filled with such strength that he seized Thord and dashed him to the ground so fiercely that he was crushed by the blow and died on the spot. Then he seized Egil. Skallagrim had a servant woman named Thorgerd Brack, who had fostered Egil when she was a child. She was an imposing woman, strong as a man, and well versed in the magic arts. Brack said, "You're attacking your own son like a mad beast, Skallagrim." Skallagrim let Egil go, but went for her instead. She fled, with Skallagrim in pursuit. They came to the shore at the end of the Digranes, and she ran off the edge of the cliff and swam away. Skallagrim threw a huge boulder after her, which struck her between the shoulder blades. Neither the woman nor the boulder ever came up afterwards. That spot is now called Brakkasund, Brack Sound. Later that evening, when they returned to Borg, Egil was furious. By the time Skallagrim and the other members of the household downed the table, Egil had not come to his seat. Then he walked into the room and went over to Skallagrim's favourite, a man who was in charge of the workers, and ran the farm with him. Egil killed him with a single blow, then went to his seat. Skallagrim did not mention the matter at all, and it was let rest afterwards. But father and son did not speak to each other, neither kind nor unkind words, and so it remained through the winter. The next summer, Thorolf returned, as was recounted earlier. After spending the winter in Iceland, he prepared his ship in Brakkasund in the spring. One day, when Thorolf was on the point of setting sail, Egil went to see his father and asked him to equip him for a journey. "I want to go abroad with Thorolf," he said. Skallagrim asked if he had discussed the matter with Thorolf. Egil said he had not, so Skallagrim told him to do so first of all. When Egil raised the subject, Thorolf said there was no chance that I would take you with me. If your father does not feel he can manage you in his house, I can't feel confident about taking you abroad with me, because you won't get away with acting there the way you do here. "In that case," said Egil, "perhaps neither of us will go." That night a fierce storm broke out and a southwesterly gale. When it was dark and the tide was at its highest, Egil went down to where the ship lay, went aboard, and walked around the awnings. He chopped through all the anchor ropes on the seaward side of the ship. He then rushed to the gangway, pushed it out to sea, and set out the moorings, fastening the ship to land. The ship drifted far out into the fjord. Then Thorolf and his men realized that the ship was adrift. They jumped in a boat, but it was much too windy for them to be able to do anything. The ship drifted over to Andakil and onto the spits there, where Egil went back to Borg. When it became known, most people condemned the trick that Egil had played, but he answered that he would not hesitate to cause Thorolf more trouble and damage if he refused to take him away. Other people intervened in their quarrel, and in the end Thorolf took Egil aboard with him that summer. On reaching his ship, Thorolf took the axe that Skallagrim had given to him and threw it overboard into deep water, so that it never came up again. Thorolf set off that summer and had a smooth passage, making land at Hordaland and heading north to Sognefjord. There they heard the news that Brynolf had died from an illness during the winter, and that his sons had shared out his inheritance among them. Thord had taken Aurland, the farm where his father had lived. He had sworn allegiance to the king and taken charge of his lands on his behalf. Thord had a daughter named Randvig, whose children were Thord and Helgi. Thord the younger also had a daughter named Randvig, the mother of Ingrid, whom King Olaf married. Helgi's son was Brynjolf, the father of Sirk, from Sognefjord and Sveen. So, kind of a rough life back in the day. Egil was rough and tough, and, well, he took no shit. Eventually, he became well versed in magic. Chapter 73, skipping a few chapters. Egil got up at daybreak the next morning. He and his companions prepared to leave, and when they were ready, they went back to the farm to look around for Armod. When they found the chamber where Armod was sleeping with his wife and daughter, Egil flung the door open and went over to his bed. He drew his sword and seized Armod by the beard with his other hand and tugged him over to the side of the bed. Armod's wife and daughter both jumped up and implored Egil not to kill him. Egil said that he would spare them for their sake. That is the fair thing to do, but if he is worth the bother, I would kill him. Then he spoke a verse. His wife and daughter aid the foul-mouthed man who twines arms with rings. I do not fear this battle-maker. You will not feel deserving of such dealings from the poet, for that drink that you served him. Let us be gone, far on our way. Then Egil cut off Armod's beard close to the chin, and gouged out one of his eyes with his finger, leaving it hanging on his cheek. After that, Egil went to his companions. There they went on their way and arrived at Thorfinn's farm early in the morning. He lived in Eidskog. Egil and his men asked for breakfast and somewhere to rest their horses. Thorfinn granted them that, and Egil and his men went into the main room. Egil asked Thorfinn if he knew anything about his companions. We arranged to meet here, he said. Thorfinn replied, 6 men came by here some time before daybreak, all heavily armed. One of Thorfinn's farmhands added, I went out to gather timber in the night, and they came across 6 men who were going somewhere. They were Armod's farmhands, and it was well before daybreak. I don't know whether these were the same 6 you mentioned. Thorfinn said that the men had been traveling later than when the farmhand thought the cartload of timber back. When Egil and his men sat down to eat, they saw a sick woman lying on the crossbench. Egil asked Thorfinn who the woman was and why she was in such a poor state. Thorfinn said she was his daughter, Helga. She has been weak for a long time. She was suffering from a wasting sickness and could not sleep at night because of some kind of delirium. Has anyone tried to find out the cause of her illness? Egil asked. We had some runes carved, said Thorfinn. The son of a farmer who lives close by did it, and since then she's been much worse. Do you know any remedy, Egil? Egil said, it might not do any harm if I try something. When Egil had eaten his fill, he went to where the woman was lying and spoke to her. He ordered them to lift her out of her bed and place clean sheets underneath her, and this was done. Then he examined the bed she had been lying on and found a whalebone with the runes carved on it. After reading the runes, Egil shaved them off and scraped them into the fire. He burned the whalebone and had her bedclothes aired. Then Egil spoke a verse. No man should carve runes unless he can read them well. Many a man goes astray around those dark letters. On the whalebone I saw 10 secret letters carved. From them the linden tree took her long harm. Egil cut some runes and placed them under the pillow of the bed where she was lying. She felt as if she were waking from deep sleep, and she said she was well again, but still very weak. But her father and mother were overjoyed. Thorfinn offered Egil all the provisions he thought he needed. So Egil gives us just a little lesson there. You know, when it comes to Galdr, it's not for amateurs. So this December, we remember Egil Skallagrimson. Remembrance is worship. Hail Egil, we raise our horn to you. Thank you for listening. Hail to you, my friend. Hail to the folk. Hail to the heathen nation. This has been heroes of our folk.